How to request workplace accommodations for your neurodivergence or other disability. And this is going to be specific to the US, but I also want to be clear that this is not legal advice and I am not a lawyer. Step one is to figure out if your employer is required to offer accommodations to people with disabilities. Employers with more than 15 employees are required by the Americans with Disabilities Act to provide reasonable accommodations. And some states have enacted their own laws that provide even more protections for employees. For example, in California, any employer with at least 5 employees is required to provide accommodations. So if your employer meets the thresholds for your state or the federal level, then you can move on to step number 2, which is figuring out what accommodations might make sense for you. An important part of the laws around accommodations is that the accommodations have to be reasonable for the employer to do, meaning that it doesn't cost them so much money or put them out so much. The accommodations that make sense for you are really going to depend on your specific condition or conditions and the type of work you do. If you need ideas for potential accommodations, you can check out this big spreadsheet I compiled that's linked in my bio. Step 3 is to figure out who you're going to ask. That could be HR, it could be your supervisor. There's no specific requirement of who you ask, but it should be someone with the authority to actually review your request or to flag your request to someone appropriate. Step 4, I think, are we on 4? Is to actually request the accommodation. Now that you know what accommodation you want, you know who you're going to ask, go and ask them. You don't technically have to ask in writing like you could ask live in a conversation, but a lot of times it's better to ask in writing just so there is that paper trail and so you can follow up on it in case they haven't gotten back to you. It's important to note that you do not have to tell your employer what your specific disability is, but you do have to mention that you have a disability or medical condition, and that's why you're requesting the accommodations. If you want a template email that you can send, I would recommend Googling Ask Jan. That's a website that's run by the federal government, and they have a template on there that you can use. Step 5 is technically to wait for your employer to get back to you about whether or not they're granting the accommodations, but I'd recommend reaching out to your medical provider and asking them for a letter that states that you do have a disability and that they support the accommodations that you're requesting. That's because employers are allowed to ask for medical documentation to verify that you have a disability and need those accommodations. The letter from your provider doesn't have to actually include what your specific disability or condition is. It just has to mention that you do have one and that the accommodations that you're requesting are relevant for that condition. And then if you haven't heard back from your employer, I recommend just checking in, following up with them. I hope this was helpful, and consider following for more neurodivergent career content like this.